What I am about to tell you, I debated this for a long time. Years, actually. I kept this locked inside the walls of private spiritual direction, away from public eyes, away from judgment. But I can no longer stay silent. Not now. Not given what I am witnessing. The acceleration of evil in my exorcism ministry. The collapse of the family. The apostasy spreading like a disease inside the very church that was meant to be its cure. The spiritual darkness descending upon entire nations like a slow suffocation. What I am going to share with you today is not my opinion. It is not speculation. It is not the fevered dream of an overworked priest. This involves verified private revelation, the testimony of souls under my direct spiritual direction, and something that was made known to me in a context that, in good conscience, I am bound to take with absolute seriousness. The 3 days of darkness is real. And before you dismiss that, before you do what I know some of you are already tempted to do, stay with me. Because what I am about to tell you involves 3 specific cities. 3 cities revealed through a chain of private revelation that I have personally examined, cross-referenced against approved Marian apparitions, and measured against the writings of the greatest mystics the Church has ever produced. What I am about to say may disturb you. It should disturb you. But more than disturbing you, it needs to prepare you. Because the darkness is coming. And most Catholics, sitting comfortably in their parishes, living their ordinary lives, are not ready. Not even close. Before we talk about cities, before we talk about what Our Lady revealed, we need to go back to the foundation. Because the 3 days of darkness did not begin with visionaries. It did not begin with 19th century mystics or private letters from stigmatists. It begins in sacred scripture itself. Exodus, chapter 10, verse 22. Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there came thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. 3 days. Total darkness. Not a solar eclipse. Not a weather anomaly. A direct, sovereign intervention of divine providence upon a civilization that had hardened its heart against God. The fathers of the Church understood something that our modern comfortable Christianity has largely forgotten. The plagues of Egypt were not merely historical events. They were prophetic types, foreshadowings of what will happen at the end of the age. St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa teaches us that God, in his providence, permits chastisements upon nations when those nations have reached a degree of corruption that would otherwise spread like a cancer to the entire human race. The chastisement is paradoxically an act of mercy. It is the surgeon's scalpel, not the executioner's blade. Now here is what demands your attention. The 3 days of darkness, as a prophetic event, appears across multiple centuries, multiple mystics, multiple countries. And when you see that kind of convergence across time, across geography, across completely independent witnesses, that is not coincidence. That is a signal that demands serious theological attention. Blessed Anna Maria Taigi, an Italian mystic of the 19th century whose cause for beatification was examined with rigorous scrutiny by multiple cardinals, spoke explicitly of 3 days and nights of darkness. A cold and bitter wind. A darkness so complete that not even candles would give light, with the exception of blessed candles held by the faithful. Fire, hail, storms. Entire cities reduced to rubble. This woman was not condemned. Her prophecies were taken seriously at the highest levels of the Vatican. Then there is Saint Padre Pio, a man who bore the stigmata for 50 years. A man whose sanctity has been confirmed by the Church itself. He wrote privately not for publication, to the Commission of Heralds in 1950. And in that letter, he described the 3 days of darkness in terms almost identical to Blessed Taigi, despite having no known direct access to her writings. That kind of convergence does not happen by accident. Now, I know the objection. I've heard it from my fellow priests more times than I can count. Father, private revelation is not binding. Catholics are not required to believe it. And they are correct, theologically. But that argument, while accurate, becomes spiritually dangerous when it is used as an excuse for indifference. The Church does not require you to believe that the sun danced at Fatima on October 13th, 1917. But if you had been standing in that field in Covida Iria and chose not to look up because private revelation is not dogma, you would have missed the miracle with your own eyes. Prudence, not skepticism, is the virtue required here. Now let me establish something clearly before we move forward. The 3 days of darkness, according to the mystics, is not primarily a punishment of fire and stone. It is primarily a spiritual event, a final confrontation between the forces of hell and the protection of heaven. The darkness itself is not merely meteorological. What descends upon the earth is the presence of malevolent supernatural power, unleashed in a way that has not occurred since the days of Noah. This is why, in my exorcism ministry, I began paying very close attention when demons, under compulsion, bound by the authority of the church, began referencing this event. I want to be careful here, because demonic testimony is always suspect. Demons are liars. The prince of lies is their father. But there is a principle in exorcism theology, going back to the early fathers of the church, that when a demon is compelled under obedience to God to speak truth, particularly about matters related to divine providence and the enemies of hell, what they say carries a degree of reliability, not certainty, but it cannot simply be dismissed. And what I was hearing from certain demonic entities across different exorcisms with different individuals in different states and countries was disturbingly consistent. They were angry, not with theatrical Hollywood anger. This was a cold, seething fury, the fury of a creature that knows its time is running short. They spoke, when forced, about a coming confrontation, about a woman, about 3 days. I began documenting this in 2019. Then something happened in 2022 that changed everything for me personally. A soul came to me under spiritual.
A soul came to me under spiritual direction, a woman of extraordinary holiness, whose life of prayer and penance I had been witnessing for over 4 years. She told me that Our Lady had appeared to her, and that Our Lady had shown her something specific. She had shown her 3 cities. But before I tell you about those cities, you must first understand Our Lady's role in the 3 days of darkness, because it is not peripheral. It is absolutely central. Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. St. John writes, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head." The Church has always understood this woman, at the primary level, to be the Virgin Mary. And the great dragon described in verse 3, who waits to devour her child, is Satan himself. This is not allegory. This is cosmic war. What most Catholics sitting in their comfortable parishes on Sunday morning have never been taught is this: this war is not finished. Revelation 12 is not a description of something that happened only in the past. It is a living description of the spiritual reality that exists right now, in this very moment. In the invisible realm that surrounds us, the battle between Our Lady and the ancient enemy is ongoing. And here is where it becomes directly relevant to the 3 days of darkness. Every single approved apparition of Our Lady in the modern era, La Salette, Lourdes, Fatima, Akita, carries the same thread, the same warning. The message is not comforting. The message is urgent. It is a warning of chastisement proportional to the degree of sin that humanity has embraced. At La Salette in 1846, Our Lady wept. She stood on a mountainside in rural France and wept in front of 2 peasant children. Think about what that means. The Mother of God weeping because she had seen what was coming. She told those children that nature would demand satisfaction for the sins of men. She described famine, plague, wars, and in the secret portion of the message, things so terrible that Pope Pius IX reportedly paled when he read them. At Fatima in 1917, Our Lady showed 3 children a vision of hell, not a theological concept, not a diagram, a direct, visceral, terrifying vision. Sister Lucia spent the rest of her life trying to describe what she saw. Millions of souls falling into a sea of fire like snowflakes, shrieking and howling in despair. Our Lady showed this to children, because she needed the world to understand that the stakes are eternal. Then there is Akita, Japan, 1973. Sister Agnes Sasagwa, approved by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger himself, later Pope Benedict XVI, in 1988. At Akita, Our Lady said something that the Catholic faithful have never fully absorbed. She said fire will fall from the sky and wipe out a great part of humanity. She said the good as well as the bad will perish, sparing neither priests nor faithful. A catastrophe of biblical proportion. These are not the words of sentimental devotion. These are warnings. Now, in the theology of private revelation, there is a distinction between absolute prophecies and conditional prophecies. An absolute prophecy will happen regardless of human response. A conditional prophecy depends on the response of humanity. It can be mitigated, delayed, or even averted through prayer and penance. The Ninevites were warned of destruction by Jonah. They repented. The destruction was averted. Most of the great Marian prophecies appear to be conditional. Our Lady comes precisely because she is asking for a response that could change the outcome. But, and this is the part one find deeply sobering, there is a threshold. There is a point at which the chastisement shifts from conditional to inevitable. Not because God becomes vindictive, but because justice requires it. Because the sin has reached a level where the entire spiritual ecology of human civilization is being destroyed. I believe we have crossed that threshold. I did not arrive at that conclusion lightly. I arrived at it after 30 years of dealing with the demonic. After 30 years of sitting across from people whose lives have been shattered by sin and spiritual attack. After 30 years of watching the church from the inside. And I will tell you honestly, what I have seen inside the church in the last 20 years has shaken me more than anything I have encountered in the exorcism room. Because the enemy is not only outside the walls, he is inside. The corruption, the apostasies, the cowardice of shepherds who will not name evil for what it is, the liturgical chaos, the dissolution of Catholic identity in the name of dialogue and accompaniment. These are not administrative failures. These are spiritual catastrophes. And Our Lady, at Fatima, at Akita, in every approved apparition, warned us specifically that the corruption would come from within the clergy. She told us. We didn't listen. Now here is the direct connection to the 3 days of darkness, according to multiple mystics. And this is consistent across Blessed Taigi, Saint Hildegard of Bingen, and others. The 3 days of darkness will be preceded by a period of intense spiritual darkness. A period where confusion reigns, where truth is suppressed, where the faithful feel abandoned. Sound familiar? We are in the preceding darkness right now. And Our Lady's role in the 3 days is not passive. According to the mystics, she is the one who intercedes at the throne of God for the mitigation of the punishment. She is the woman who stands between humanity and the full weight of divine justice. The blessed candles that give light during those 3 days represent her protection, her intercession, her mantle over the souls who have consecrated themselves to her. But she also came to warn about specific places. The soul I mentioned, the woman of extraordinary holiness under my spiritual direction, described 3 cities to me in a session that lasted nearly 2 hours. She was not dramatic. She was not emotional in the way you might expect. She was precise, calm, deliberate, and what she described matched things I had no reason to anticipate. Let me say this plainly before I continue. I am a priest. I am a
theologian. I am not a sensationalist. I have spent my career warning people against false private revelation, against emotional manipulation, against the kind of spiritual theater that feeds curiosity without producing conversion. I am not naming these cities in order to cause panic. I am sharing their characteristics, with every caveat I am about to provide, because the purpose of prophetic warning has always been to produce repentance, preparation, and prayer. If what I share produces anything other than those 3 things in you, you are receiving it wrongly. The first city shown to this soul was a major port city, a city connected to the sea, a city with a long history of both great Catholicism and great apostasy, a city where the faith once flourished, and was then systematically destroyed from within, culturally, institutionally, generation by generation. I will not name it directly, but I will describe it, and I will let those who have ears to hear, hear. This city was shown in the vision as being struck first, not after the darkness had fully descended, at the very onset of the 3 days. The soul described seeing a great light, not a holy light, a devastating light, followed immediately by the absence of all light. The sequence was rapid. The city was caught completely unprepared. What struck me, what made me sit up in my chair, was a specific detail that preceded the catastrophe. She described the churches of this city in the vision, and the churches were empty. Not empty because of persecution, empty because the people had chosen to leave. The pews were abandoned. The tabernacles were present, but the faithful were gone, not driven out by force, but departed by choice, by attrition, by distraction, by comfort. This is precisely what Blessed Taigi described as the spiritual condition that precedes the 3 days. She wrote that the darkness would come upon a world where the majority of even baptized Christians had effectively abandoned the practice of the faith, not with a formal declaration of apostasy, simply by drifting. The second detail that arrested my attention was the harbor. She described ships stationary in the water, not moving. She interpreted this as the catastrophe striking in a moment of commercial activity, of trade, of economic confidence. A moment when the city was most convinced of its own prosperity, most deeply satisfied with its own productivity. The theologians will recognize this type immediately. The destruction of Sodom came when Lot's contemporaries were eating and drinking. The flood came when men were marrying and giving in marriage. Divine intervention in the affairs of nations tends to come precisely at the moment when humanity is most convinced it does not need God. The third detail, the one I have sat with the longest, was the sound she described in the vision. Not an explosion, not an impact. A sound she could only describe as a tearing, as if the fabric of something were being ripped, as if the physical world itself were being pulled back like a curtain. I know what that means theologically. It means the veil between the natural and the supernatural was collapsing. The 3 days of darkness, as the mystics have always described it, is not merely a physical event. It is a metaphysical event, the laws of nature being superseded by divine power. What people will experience is not only physical darkness. It is the withdrawal of the natural protection that God's providence ordinarily provides to human civilization. When that protection is withdrawn even partially, the demonic has access in ways it normally does not. This is why the instructions given through the mystics are so specific. Stay inside. Do not open doors or windows. Do not look outside. Do not respond to voices calling your name, even if they sound like loved ones. Because during those 3 days, the demonic will be unleashed in a way unprecedented in human history. The soul asked Our Lady in the vision why this city was struck first. Our Lady's response came not as words, but as an image. She was shown the history of the city, its Catholic heritage, the saints who had walked its streets, the priests who had died for the faith within its borders, the graces poured out upon it across centuries. And then she was shown what had been done with those graces. They had been rejected, not in a single dramatic moment of rejection, but slowly, generation by generation, grace after grace offered and declined. To whom much is given, much will be required. This is not a punitive God acting from anger. This is a just God acting from justice, a justice that, at its deepest level, is an expression of love. Because to allow souls to continue in a trajectory toward eternal damnation without any dramatic call to conversion would itself be a failure of love. The chastisement on this city is paradoxically a final act of mercy. The question is whether there are enough souls within it who will hear the warning in time, who will go to confession, who will consecrate themselves to Our Lady, who will light their blessed candles and keep them ready. The night is coming. The second city is in many ways more disturbing than the first, because the first city, if you knew its name, would carry a grim familiarity, a tragic logic. The apostasy would make sense to you. The second city offers no such comfort. The second city is not known primarily for its apostasy. It is known for its power. It sits at or near the center of political and cultural authority in the Western world. Its decisions affect hundreds of millions of people. For generations, it has projected an image of strength, of civilization, of ordered governance. And that is precisely the problem. The soul described being shown this city from above, as if from a great height. And what she saw was extraordinary. Two realities simultaneously. The visible city as it appears to the human eye, its monuments, its institutions, its symbols of authority. And beneath it, woven into it, a second reality, a spiritual reality. And in that spiritual
reality, the city was hollow. That was the word she used. Hollow. Like a structure that has maintained its external form, but has been eaten from within. The buildings were standing. The halls were populated. The institutions were functioning. But the spiritual substance, the animating principle of Christian civilization that had once given those institutions their legitimacy and meaning, was gone. St. Augustine described something similar in the City of God when he wrote about the fall of Rome. The pagans blamed the Christians. Augustine's response was to show that Rome had already fallen internally, spiritually, long before the Visigoths ever arrived at the gates. The external collapse was simply the physical expression of a spiritual reality that had already occurred. What this soul was shown is that the same dynamic is at work in the second city. The attack during the 3 days is not the beginning of its destruction. It is the culmination of a destruction that has been occurring for decades. Invisibly in the spiritual realm. The nature of what she was shown regarding this city was different from the first. The first city was struck with sudden, overwhelming physical destruction. The second city experienced something different, a paralysis, a cessation of authority, a moment in which all the mechanisms of power, political, military, institutional, simply stopped functioning. In the vision, the lights went out in every building of power. Not metaphorically, literally. Every coordinating mechanism of civilization ceased to operate. And into that vacuum, something entered. She could not fully describe it. She said it was like trying to describe a color that does not exist in the visible spectrum. She knew it was demonic, but not individual demons. Not the kind of possessing entity I encounter in exorcisms. This was something more like a collective spiritual force. A wave of malevolent intention, given temporary, but terrifying permission to operate freely in the physical world. This is consistent with what the mystics describe as occurring during the 3 days. God withdraws, temporarily, the restraining hand of his providence. The demonic is normally constrained, not because it lacks the desire to destroy, but because divine providence limits its access. During the 3 days, that limitation is reduced. The demons are given a degree of freedom proportional to the degree of sin that humanity has accumulated. Think of it as a spiritual debt, building for generations. The debt comes due. She saw in the vision people who had gone outside, people who had not heeded the warning, either because they didn't know it or didn't believe it, or because curiosity overcame prudence. And she described their faces. I will not repeat what she described, but I will say this. The instruction to remain inside is not superstition. It is not medieval folklore. It is a spiritual survival instruction from heaven itself, passed down through multiple centuries and multiple mystics, cross-referenced and consistent. For this second city, this city of power and hollow grandeur, the warning is perhaps more urgent than anywhere else. Because the people of power in this city have, more than any others, made themselves into gods. They have sat in their halls of authority and made decisions that destroyed the family, promoted the culture of death, and systematically dismantled the Christian foundations of Western civilization. And they have done so with the calm confidence of people who believe they are accountable to no one. They are about to discover they are accountable to someone. The response Our Lady asked for regarding this city was specific. She asked for rosaries, not one, not a few, but continuous, sustained, organized chains of rosary prayer from faithful, directed specifically at the conversion of those in political power and at the mitigation of the coming judgment on this city. Because even now, the window has not closed. It is narrowing, but it is not yet closed. The third city surprised me. And I say that having spent decades in this ministry, hearing things that would make a secular psychiatrist question his own sanity, I thought I knew what to expect when this soul described the third city. I was wrong. This city is not a capital. It is not a major port. By the standards of global power and influence, it would be considered secondary, perhaps even obscure to those who think in terms of geopolitical importance. And yet in the vision, it was shown with the same gravity, the same spiritual weight as the other two. The soul asked Our Lady, why? What had this city done? What made it equivalent, in prophetic significance, to cities carrying vastly greater temporal power? And the answer was this. It was not what this city had done. It was what this city had been given, and what had been done with that gift. This city had been the site of a significant religious event within living memory. An event that had drawn the faithful, around which a genuine renewal of Catholic life had begun to coalesce. Grace had been poured out here, tangibly, visibly, in ways that even skeptics had taken note of. And then something happened. Not a single dramatic event. A slow corruption, a gradual capture of the institutions through which that grace had been flowing. The organizations, the communities, the structures built in the wake of that religious event were, one by one, infiltrated, compromised, and turned toward purposes that were the exact opposite of the charism they had been given. And the people of that city had either failed to notice or had chosen not to notice, because noticing would have required action, standing up, speaking out, paying a social cost. And comfort is a more powerful sedative than most people realize. The third city in the vision was not shown being struck the way the first two were shown. The soul described something different. She described the city being overshadowed, as if a great darkness simply settled upon it like a fog, like a shroud. Not sudden, not violent, gradual and complete. And in that darkness, the people wandered. They were alive, but they could not find each other, could not find their homes, could not find the churches. And those churches, once centers of authentic spiritual renewal, were locked from the inside. Not by persecutors, by the people within them, by those who
decaptured those institutions, and who, when the darkness came, chose to protect themselves rather than open the doors to the desperate souls outside. This image shook me more than anything else in the entire account, because I have seen this happen, not in a prophetic vision, in real life. Communities founded on authentic charisms becoming captured by leadership more concerned with institutional survival than spiritual welfare. Churches that should be sanctuaries becoming fortresses of control. And when the sheep need the shepherd most, the shepherd locks the door. Our Lord had a word for that kind of shepherd. He called them hirelings. The third city carries a specific warning for the Catholic faithful, and it is this: do not place your trust in institutions. Do not assume that because something bears a Catholic name, a Catholic history, or a Catholic aesthetic, that it is spiritually safe. The greatest spiritual dangers in the coming days will not come from obviously pagan sources. They will come from within structures that look Catholic on the outside. Test everything against the perennial teaching of the Church. Test everything against the Gospels. Test everything against authentic tradition, not the manufactured tradition of the last 60 years, but the living tradition that goes back to the apostles. And cultivate in your own home the ability to be the church for your own family. Because the time may come when the institutional church in your area is not available to you in the way you expect. Sacraments may become harder to access. The priests who preach the truth may become fewer. The sanctuaries that are genuinely safe may be more difficult to find. This is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for preparation. And now let me close this the way I would close a retreat conference. Because everything I have shared with you today, the theology, the private revelation, the three cities, the warnings, All of it is useless if it does not translate into concrete practical spiritual action in your daily life. Prophecy without conversion is just entertainment, and I refuse to be entertainment. So let me tell you, as clearly and as pastorally as I can, what the tradition of a church has always said about how to prepare. First, the state of your soul. Not your bunker, not your food storage, not your generator, not your plans. The state of your soul. If you were to die tonight, and many of the people buried under the ash of Pompeii also did not expect to die that day, what would be the condition of your soul? Are you in a state of grace? Have you made a good confession? Have you repaired, to the best of your ability, the damage caused by your sins? Have you made peace with God, with the church, with the people you have wronged? This is the first and only irreplaceable preparation. Everything else is secondary. Second, Marian consecration. I am not talking about sentimental devotion to a pretty statue. I am talking about the formal total consecration of yourself to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, according to the method taught by St. Louis Delaware Montfort, adopted by Our Lady herself at Fatima. This is not a formula. It is a spiritual reality. It places you under her mantle in a way that has concrete effects in the spiritual realm. The mystics are unanimous on this point. Those consecrated to Our Lady will receive a specific protection during the 3 days. Not a guarantee of physical survival. That is in God's hands alone. But a protection of the soul, a clarity of mind, a peace of heart in the midst of the worst spiritual darkness in human history. Third, the blessed candles. I know this sounds old-fashioned. I know that in an age of flashlights and battery-powered lanterns, the instruction to have blessed candles seems quaint. But the mystics were specific. Ordinary candles will not give light during the 3 days. Blessed candles, candles blessed according to the traditional rite of the church, will. Get them blessed. Keep them in your home. Have them ready. Fourth, stay informed through the right sources. There is an enormous amount of content circulating right now on Catholic platforms and in well-meaning communities that purports to be reliable information about private revelation and prophecy. Much of it is not reliable. Some of it is actively dangerous because it substitutes sensationalism for discernment, feeding a kind of spiritual thrill-seeking that is the opposite of the sober preparation the tradition calls for. Test every claimed revelation against 3 things. Does it contradict defined Catholic doctrine? Does it produce fear rather than conversion? Does it come from a source that cannot be verified against the consistent witness of approved mystics and the teaching of the Church? If the answer to any of those 3 questions is yes, be very careful. Fifth, build community. The spiritual life was never meant to be lived in isolation. The domestic church, the family household, is the fundamental unit of Christian civilization. It was always so. It will be especially so in times of crisis. Know your Catholic neighbors. Know the faithful families in your area. Build relationships so that if something catastrophic were to happen, you would not face it alone. Cultivate relationships with good, orthodox, spiritually serious priests. Receive the sacraments from them as frequently as you possibly can, because the Eucharist and confession above all are the primary channels through which God sustains the soul in times of darkness. Sixth, and this may be the instruction that surprises you most, forgive everyone who has ever wronged you, not for their sake alone, for yours, because the soul that carries unforgiveness into the 3 days of darkness carries with it a vulnerability that no physical preparation can compensate for. The enemy knows exactly where the wounds are, and he is very good at exploiting them. Prepare your soul. Prepare your home. Prepare your family. The third city is a mirror. When you look at what happened there, the gift squandered, the grace captured, the door locked against the desperate, the question to ask is not, isn't that terrible? The question is that me? Is that my parish? Is that my community? Is that my heart? And finally, do not be afraid. I know that sounds strange given everything I have just told you. I know that some of what I have shared today is genuinely frightening. 3 cities, a darkness.
That is demonic in nature, a period of judgment upon a civilization that has abandoned God. But I want you to remember something. I want you to remember what Our Lady said to the children at Fatima, after she showed them the vision of hell, after the fire and the horror and the shrieking souls. After all of that, she said, "In the end, my immaculate heart will triumph. Not might triumph. Not could triumph if conditions are favorable. Will triumph. This is not a small God running a close race. This is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who brought Israel through the Red Sea, who raised his son from the dead, who has been writing straight with the crooked lines of human history for 6,000 years. The 3 days of darkness, if and when they come, are not the defeat of God. They are the victory of God, the moment in which divine providence moves decisively against the accumulated evil of the age and begins the restoration of what was lost. There is a morning after the 3 days. The mystics speak of it. The sun rises. The birds sing. The air is clean. The evil is gone. And the faithful who remained inside, who prayed, who kept their blessed candles burning, who held their rosaries and consecrated themselves to Our Lady, they emerge. And what they find is the beginning of a new era of Christian civilization. I believe we will live to see that morning. But between now and then, there is the night. Prepare for the night. Go to confession. Pray your rosary. Consecrate yourself and your family to Our Lady. Get your candles blessed. Build your community. Feed your soul with the sacraments. And above all, do not be afraid, because the woman clothed with the sun is standing between us and the dragon, and she does not lose.